December 4th, 2024. 7:46 a.m., Midtown Manhattan. A 50-year-old CEO walks toward the New York Hilton Midtown Hotel. He's about to attend an early morning investor conference for United Health Group. His name is Brian Thompson, Chief Executive Officer of United Healthcare, father of two, Minnesota resident. He has no idea these will be the last steps he ever takes. A figure in a dark hooded jacket approaches from behind, raises a handgun, and fires. Thompson falls to the pavement. The gunman fires again and again. The weapon jams. The shooter calmly clears it, fires once more, then flees on an electric bike into Central Park. The entire assassination captured on surveillance cameras. Professional, calculated, cold-blooded. 5 days later, police arrest a 26-year-old man at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. His name is Luigi Mangione, Ivy League educated, from a wealthy Maryland family. In his backpack, police find a ghost gun, fake IDs, and a manifesto detailing his rage against the American healthcare system. He's charged with murder. The Justice Department announces they'll seek the death penalty. But then, 13 months later, something extraordinary happens. A federal judge rules the death penalty is off the table, and just 1 day before that ruling, a man shows up at the Brooklyn jail where Mangione is being held, claims to be an FBI agent, and tries to free him. He's carrying a barbecue fork and what appears to be a pizza cutter. This is the story of Luigi Mangione, a case that has divided America. A young man viewed by millions as either a cold-blooded murderer or a folk hero who took a stand against a broken system. And today, January 30th, 2026, his case took two dramatic turns that nobody saw coming. Before we dive deeper, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at Forensic Disconnect, we examine the cases that capture the world's attention. Real crimes, real investigations, real controversies. And if you're following this case as closely as millions of others are, drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's developments. Let's go back to the beginning. December 4th, 2024. The morning that changed everything. Brian Thompson was 50 years old. He'd been CEO of United Healthcare since April 2021. Under his leadership, United Healthcare had become one of the largest health insurance companies in America, covering tens of millions of people. The company was profitable, very profitable, but it was also controversial. United Healthcare had one of the highest claim denial rates in the industry. Patients and doctors frequently complained about denied coverage, delayed approvals, and administrative nightmares. Thompson knew the company had critics, but he had no reason to believe he was in danger that morning. He was staying at a hotel across the street from the Hilton. He left around 6:45 a.m. to walk to the investor conference. He was alone. No security detail. No bodyguards. Just a CEO walking to a business meeting. Surveillance footage shows him approaching the hotel entrance. Then, at 7:46 a.m., the attack begins. A figure appears behind him. The gunman is wearing a hooded jacket, a black face mask, and a backpack. He raises what appears to be a 9mm handgun equipped with a suppressor. He fires. Thompson stumbles, turns. The gunman fires again. The weapon jams. Here's where it gets chilling. The shooter doesn't panic, doesn't run. He calmly performs what's called a tap-rack-bang malfunction clearance. Taps the magazine, racks the slide, fires again. This is someone who knows firearms. Someone who's trained. Someone who's prepared. Thompson collapses on the sidewalk. The shooter stands over him, fires one more time, then walks calmly away. He crosses the street, gets on an electric bike, and disappears into Central Park. The entire attack takes less than 30 seconds. Professional, efficient, methodical. This was not a crime of passion. This was an execution. Police arrive within minutes. Thompson is rushed to Mount Sinai West Hospital. He's pronounced dead at 7:56 a.m., 10 minutes after he was shot. The massive manhunt begins immediately. NYPD deploys hundreds of officers. They review surveillance footage. They track the shooter's escape route through Central Park. They discover he'd been waiting outside the hotel for several minutes before Thompson arrived. This wasn't random. This was targeted. Then, investigators find something extraordinary. Shell casings at the scene have words written on them. Deny, defend, depose. These are words associated with insurance industry tactics to avoid paying claims. The title of a book critical of the insurance industry. This wasn't just murder. This was a message. The search intensifies. Police release surveillance images of the suspect, a distinctive gray backpack, a hooded jacket, but his face is mostly obscured. They track his movements before and after the shooting. He'd taken a Greyhound bus from Atlanta to New York days earlier. He'd stayed at a hostel on the Upper West Side. He'd been planning this. For 5 days, the shooter remains at large. The story dominates national news. People speculate about motive, about whether this was a disgruntled patient, a family member of someone denied coverage, a healthcare worker frustrated with the system. The CEO of one of America's largest health insurers had been assassinated in broad daylight in Manhattan, and nobody knew who did it or why. Then, on December 9th, police get a tip. A McDonald's employee in Altoona, Pennsylvania, about 280 miles from New York City, recognizes the suspect from the surveillance photos. He's sitting in the restaurant, working on a laptop. Police arrive. They approach. They ask for identification. The man gives them a fake New Jersey ID. But officers aren't convinced. They ask more questions. He becomes nervous. When they ask if he's been to New York recently, he starts shaking. That's when they search his backpack. And what they find links him directly to the crime: a ghost gun, an untraceable firearm made from parts that can be assembled at home, a suppressor, multiple fake IDs, and perhaps most damning, a handwritten manifesto, 3 pages, detailing his anger at the American healthcare system, his belief that violence was necessary to bring attention to the industry's practices, his justification for what he'd done. The man is Luigi Mangione, 26 years old, born into a prominent Maryland family. His grandfather had founded a country club and real estate empire. Luigi had attended an elite prep school, graduated as valedictorian, went to the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school, earned a bachelor's and master's degree in computer science. He was brilliant, successful, from privilege. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Friends would later say he'd suffered from chronic back pain, he'd undergone spinal surgery, he'd become increasingly isolated. He'd moved to Hawaii, then to a co-living space in Honolulu. He'd stopped responding to friends and family. His mother had reported him missing months before the shooting. And now, sitting in a Pennsylvania McDonald's, police had found him with the weapon, found him with writings that prosecutors would later call a confession. Luigi Mangione was charged with murder. The legal proceedings began immediately. Pennsylvania authorities charged him with firearms offenses and forgery for the fake IDs. New York prosecutors prepared murder charges. And then federal prosecutors stepped in. Because this wasn't just a murder case. This was, they argued, an act of terrorism. An assassination meant to intimidate an entire industry, to influence public policy through violence. On December 19th, federal prosecutors unsealed a 4-count indictment. Count 1, murder through use of a firearm. Count 2, stalking resulting in death. Count 3, stalking through interstate commerce. Count 4, using a firearm equipped with a silencer during the stalking. The first count carried a potential death sentence. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced the charges in a press conference. She called Thompson's death a premeditated, cold-blooded assassination that shocked America. She framed the case as part of the Trump administration's agenda to stop violent crime and, in her words, make America safe again. She directed federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty. This would be the Justice Department's first attempt to pursue capital punishment in President Trump's second term. But here's where the case became more complicated than anyone expected. Because Luigi Mangione wasn't universally condemned. Far from it. Something strange was happening in public opinion. Something prosecutors hadn't anticipated. Online, millions of people began expressing support for Mangione. Not support for murder, they insisted, but support for his message, support for someone who, they believed, had taken a stand against an industry that profits from human suffering. Social media flooded with stories of denied claims, bankrupting medical bills, loved ones who died because insurance wouldn't cover treatment. A legal defense fund was created. Within weeks, it had raised over $1 million. GoFundMe pages, fundraisers, donations pouring in from people across the country. Some called him a folk hero, a modern-day Robin Hood, someone who'd done what millions of frustrated Americans wished they could do. This wasn't universal, of course. Many people, including Thompson's family, were horrified by the support Mangione was receiving. They pointed out that Brian Thompson was a human being, a father, a husband, someone who didn't deserve to be murdered on a sidewalk regardless of what company he worked for. The conversation became deeply polarizing. Mangione pleaded not guilty. His legal team, led by high-profile attorney Karen Friedman Agnifilo, began building their defense. And one of their first major fights was over the evidence. Specifically, The backpack, the ghost gun, the manifesto, everything police had seized in Pennsylvania. The defense argued the search was illegal, that police had violated Mangione's Fourth Amendment rights, that the evidence should be suppressed, meaning it couldn't be used at trial. Without that evidence, the prosecution's case would be significantly weaker. In December 2025 and January 2026, the court held extensive hearings on this issue. Several Altoona police officers testified about the arrest, about why they'd searched the backpack, about what they'd found. The defense hammered away at every detail, argued that the officers had conducted an improper search without a warrant, that the evidence was tainted. Judge Margaret Garnett, the federal judge overseeing the case, initially indicated she didn't think a full evidentiary hearing was necessary. But then, on January 13th, she changed her mind. She said she needed to hear more testimony. The stakes were too high, the charges too serious. Meanwhile, prosecutors were preparing for 2 separate trials. Yes, 2. Mangione faced charges in both state court and federal court. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office had charged him with second-degree murder and weapons offenses under state law. Those charges carried a maximum sentence of life in prison. New York abolished the death penalty at the state level in 2004, but the federal charges were different. They could result in execution, and prosecutors were determined to pursue that penalty. In late January 2026, the Manhattan DA's office sent a letter to the state court judge. They wanted to set a trial date, specifically July 1st, 2026. They argued the state case should go first before the federal trial. This created a complicated legal situation. 2 sets of prosecutors, 2 trials, 2 different potential outcomes. The defense objected. They argued it would be impossible to get a fair trial with everything happening simultaneously. But prosecutors pushed ahead. Then came the bombshell rulings, 2 of them, in less than 24 hours. On Wednesday night, January 28, 2026, something bizarre happened at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. This is the federal jail where Luigi Mangione has been held since December. It's a notorious facility, overcrowded, dangerous. The same jail where Jeffrey Epstein's associate Ghislaine Maxwell was held. Around 9 p.m., a man approached the facility. He told prison staff he was an FBI agent. He claimed he had a court order from a judge to release an inmate. He demanded to be let inside. Staff were immediately suspicious. They asked for credentials. The man produced a Minnesota driver's license, not FBI credentials, a driver's license. He claimed to be in possession of weapons. Prison workers called law enforcement. When officers searched the man's backpack, they found items that made no sense for an FBI agent. A barbecue fork, a round steel blade that resembled a pizza cutter. No badge, no FBI identification, no court order. The man was arrested. His name is Mark Anderson, 35 years old, from Mankato, Minnesota. On Thursday, January 29th, he was charged in federal court with impersonating an FBI agent. Initially, the criminal complaint didn't identify which inmate Anderson allegedly tried to free, but law enforcement sources quickly confirmed it was Luigi Mangione. Anderson, it turns out, had traveled to New York for a job opportunity that didn't work out. He'd been working in a pizzeria. And for reasons that remain unclear, he'd decided to try to break Mangione out of jail by pretending to be a federal agent, with a barbecue fork. The story is almost comically absurd, except it's real. It happened. A man actually tried to free Luigi Mangione from federal detention by impersonating the FBI. The fact that he thought this would work suggests either severe mental health issues or a complete detachment from reality, but it also illustrates something significant about this case, the level of public fascination, the cult of personality that's developed around Mangione. The fact that some people view him not as a criminal defendant accused of murder, but as a hero worth rescuing. Anderson appeared in Brooklyn federal court on Thursday afternoon. He's facing serious charges. Impersonating a federal officer is a felony. If convicted, he could face years in prison, all for an attempted jailbreak that had 0 chance of success. That was Wednesday and Thursday. Then came Friday, January 30th, 2026. Today, Luigi Mangione appeared in Manhattan federal court for what was expected to be a routine pretrial hearing. His attorneys were still fighting to suppress the backpack evidence. Prosecutors were preparing for trial. The death penalty hung over everything. Then Judge Margaret Garnett issued 2 crucial rulings. First, she addressed the suppression motion. The defense had argued the Pennsylvania police search was illegal, that everything found in the backpack should be excluded from trial. Garnett disagreed. She ruled that the search was reasonable under the facts of the case. The arrest was lawful. The officers had probable cause. The evidence would be admissible. This was a major victory for prosecutors. The ghost gun, the manifesto, the fake IDs, all of it could be presented to a jury. The defense had lost this fight. But then came the second ruling, the one nobody saw coming. Judge Garnett addressed the death penalty, specifically whether the charges against Mangione actually qualified for capital punishment under federal law. The defense had filed a motion arguing they didn't, that the legal basis for seeking death was flawed. Federal death penalty law is complex. The government can only seek execution for certain crimes. Murder alone isn't enough. It has to be murder committed during another serious federal offense, a crime of violence. The prosecution had argued that Mangione's alleged stalking of Brian Thompson met this definition. That stalking was a crime of violence, and therefore the murder could be death eligible. Judge Garnett examined this argument carefully. She looked at Supreme Court precedent, at how crime of violence is defined in federal law, and she reached a conclusion that surprised almost everyone in the courtroom. Stalking, she ruled, is not a crime of violence under the legal definition that matters for death penalty eligibility. Her reasoning was technical, almost philosophical. She acknowledged it might seem strange. She wrote in her opinion that her analysis may strike the average person, and indeed many lawyers and judges, as tortured and strange. But Supreme Court precedent, she said, bound her to a specific analytical framework, one that focuses on whether a crime, by its nature, involves the use of physical force. Stalking, she concluded, could theoretically be committed without physical force. Someone could stalk another person through surveillance, through following them, through threats, without ever using violence. Therefore, under the narrow legal definition, it wasn't a crime of violence. And if it wasn't a crime of violence, it couldn't be used as the predicate offense to make murder death eligible. No one could seriously question that this is violent criminal conduct, Garnett wrote. But the law required her to analyze it in a way that was totally divorced from the conduct at issue. The result, Judge Garnett dismissed 2 of the 4 federal counts. Count 1, murder through use of a firearm, the count that carried a death sentence, was gone. Count 4, using a firearm equipped with a silencer during stalking, was also dismissed. 2 counts remained, both stalking charges. Maximum penalty, life in prison without possibility of parole. Still extremely serious. Still potentially the rest of Mangione's life behind bars. But not death. The courtroom was stunned. In the hallways, Mangione's supporters erupted in cheers. His attorney, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, emerged and told reporters she wanted to thank the court for this incredible decision. "We're all very relieved," she said. Prosecutors were silent. This was a devastating blow to their case. The Attorney General herself had ordered them to seek death. They'd built their entire strategy around capital punishment. Now it was off the table. They could appeal, but Garnett's reasoning was sound. Based on Supreme Court precedent, an appeal might not succeed. Judge Garnett also announced the trial schedule. Federal trial would begin with jury selection on September 8, 2026. Opening statements on October 13th. She noted that the Manhattan DA wants the state trial to start July 1st, but for now, the federal schedule stands. So where does this leave us? Luigi Mangione still faces serious charges. He's still accused of murder. He could still spend the rest of his life in prison, but he will not face execution. The state case in Manhattan proceeds separately. Second-degree murder, weapons charges, forgery. Those charges carry their own potential life sentence. New York prosecutors are pushing for a July trial. They want to go first before the federal case. Legal experts say this creates unusual complications. If Mangione is convicted in state court first and sentenced to life, what happens to the federal case? Do prosecutors still pursue it? What's the point if he's already facing life in prison? These are questions that will be debated in the coming months. But today's ruling changes the fundamental nature of this case. It removes the ultimate punishment from consideration, and it raises profound questions about how we charge and try cases that intersect with political and social movements, because that's what this has become, whether we like it or not, whether it's appropriate or not. Luigi Mangione is not just a murder defendant. He's become a symbol, a polarizing figure in America's debate about healthcare, wealth inequality, corporate power, and violence. His supporters see him as someone who stood up to a system that values profit over human life. They point to United Healthcare's claim denial rates, to stories of people who died because they couldn't get coverage, to the billions in profits while Americans go bankrupt from medical bills. They don't condone murder, they say, but they understand the rage that led to it. His critics see him as a murderer who killed an innocent man. They point out that Brian Thompson didn't write the laws governing healthcare, that he was an executive doing a job, that whatever your feelings about insurance companies, assassination is not the answer, that violence to achieve political goals is terrorism. Both perspectives exist. Both are passionate. And the case sits at the intersection of these competing worldviews. The trial, when it happens, will be extraordinary. The evidence is strong. Surveillance footage, the ghost gun, the manifesto, Mangione's own writings explaining his motivations. Prosecutors have what appears to be an overwhelming case that he killed Brian Thompson, but the defense will likely argue something more complex. Not that he didn't do it, but about his mental state, about chronic pain, about perceived injustices in the healthcare system, about whether this was premeditated murder or something else. They'll try to humanize him, to explain how a brilliant young man from privilege ended up in a McDonald's with a ghost gun and a manifesto. The jury will have to weigh all of this, the facts, the law, their own feelings about healthcare, about violence, about justice. It will be one of the most watched trials in recent American history. And today's ruling ensures that whatever the verdict, Luigi Mangione will not be executed. He may die in prison. He may spend 60 years behind bars, but the state will not put him to death. Judge Garnett's decision also highlights something important about our legal system. Even in high-profile cases, even when the Attorney General personally orders prosecutors to seek death, even when public pressure is intense, judges still examine the law, still apply precedent, still make decisions based on legal reasoning, not politics or emotion. Garnett acknowledged her conclusion might seem strange, but she followed the law as she understood it. That's what judges are supposed to do. So what happens next? Mangione remains in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, the same jail where Mark Anderson tried to free him with a barbecue fork. He'll be there until trial. His legal team will prepare for 2 separate proceedings, state court in July if that schedule holds, federal court in October. The evidence will be presented. Witnesses will testify. The surveillance footage will be shown. The manifesto will be read. A jury will deliberate. And eventually, there will be a verdict. But one thing is now certain. Whether Luigi Mangione is convicted or acquitted, whether he spends the rest of his life in prison or somehow goes free, he will not face execution. The death penalty in this case is off the table. Brian Thompson's family continues to grieve. They've released statements expressing their pain at seeing the man who allegedly killed their husband and father treated as a folk hero. They've asked for privacy, for respect, for people to remember that Brian was a person, not just a symbol, and that's worth remembering. Whatever your feelings about health insurance companies, about corporate America, about the injustices in our healthcare system, a man was killed. A father of 2 was shot on a sidewalk on his way to work. A family lost someone they loved. That's real. That matters. The question this case forces us to confront is complicated. How do we balance outrage at systemic injustice with the fundamental principle that violence is not the answer? How do we acknowledge both that people are dying because they can't afford healthcare, and that assassinating executives won't fix that? How do we have a national conversation about corporate accountability without glorifying murder? These are questions without easy answers. Questions that will continue to be debated as this case moves forward. Questions that will follow us long after the verdict is rendered. Luigi Mangione's trial will happen. Justice, in whatever form it takes, will be pursued. But the larger questions this case raises, about healthcare, about inequality, about violence and change, those questions remain, and they won't be resolved in a courtroom. What do you think about today's ruling? Should Luigi Mangione have faced the death penalty? Do you believe this was a political assassination or the act of someone pushed to the edge by a broken system? And what does it say about America that a murder defendant has raised over $1 million in donations and has supporters cheering in courthouse hallways? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. But remember, this is a real case with real victims. Brian Thompson's family is still grieving. Be respectful in how you discuss this. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. We cover the cases that matter with facts, context, and respect for everyone involved. Hit that notification bell for updates as this case develops. And share this video with anyone following the Luigi Mangione story. The trial is coming. The evidence will be presented. And America will watch as 12 jurors decide the fate of a man who some call a murderer and others call a hero. Whatever the outcome, this case has already changed the conversation about healthcare in America. Whether that change is for better or worse, only time will tell. Luigi Mangione, Brian Thompson, January 30th, 2026, the day the death penalty came off the table. The story continues.